BMW is known for making higher-end luxury automobiles that for over 50 years now have been promoted as the ultimate driving machine. A really good slogan to convey the brand's identity. These are regarded as some of the most luxurious cars on the market. The company is headquartered in Munich, Germany, the capital city of Bavaria, which is where the B in the name comes from. It is officially called Bayerische Motorenwerk, or translated to Bavarian Motor Works. Today, BMW ranks among the biggest automakers in the world, selling over 2 million vehicles globally each year, with a record 370,000 of them being sold in the United States. In many ways, they are looking stronger than ever, but it has been a bumpy road to get there. I'm talking about multiple times where the future of the company was in question, but impressively, they have always been able to correct course and recover. Truthfully, it is kind of amazing that they still exist today on this scale, so in this video, I want to outline some of the most significant rises and falls throughout their 100+ year history. Now, the structure of BMW in the early days can be very tricky to follow with different companies coming together to establish it, so I'm not going to confuse everything with all of that, but the ultimate cause behind its creation was World War I. Originally, BMW specialized in making engines for aircraft that were used by Germany during that war. You might expect that is where the propeller-looking logo comes from, but according to the company, that was just a big coincidence. The circle shape was taken from one of the previous companies that went into creating BMW, and the colors and pattern were taken from Bavaria's state flag. This initial version of the company, however, was short-lived, because only 3 years after officially being established, World War I ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. This right here had such a major impact on BMW, because the treaty essentially held Germany responsible for starting the war. It said that they had to reduce their military and that they could not produce aircraft anymore, which obviously is bad news for a company that specializes in aircraft engines. BMW was forced to shift their focus toward other engines, brakes for trains, and eventually vehicles. In 1923, BMW introduced its first motorcycle, the R32, that gained recognition a few years later when it was used to break the motorcycle speed record, traveling at 173.4 miles per hour. And that same year that the record was broken, in 1929, BMW introduced its first luxury car. All of this set the company in directions that would later help form its identity, but sadly, the true recovery of BMW during this time, if you want to call it that, was centered around World War II. Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, as a German manufacturing company in the 1930s and 40s, they were greatly affected by it. This is where the government got involved, because right when Hitler took control, BMW was forced to switch most of their manufacturing back to aircraft engines that were used by the country's Air Force. At their peak during this time, before the end of the war, BMW estimates that their workforce had grown to over 50,000 people, over half of which were being forced to work there. Typically, they were brought in as prisoners from concentration camps. Yeah, this is an extremely heavy topic that I do not want to explore much deeper in this video, so moving on from that, the next fall of BMW has multiple layers to it, but as you would expect, it started with the end of World War II. Following the war, the Allied forces took control of BMW's manufacturing plants for a few years, dismantled them, and yet again, they were forced to rebuild and re-establish themselves in new directions. Going into the 1950s, the R24 motorcycle was their best-selling product, making BMW primarily a motorcycle company that was having trouble establishing themselves in the car market. In 1952, they made their first post-war effort in that area with the 501, followed by similar models that were all very high-end, but not particularly profitable. They cost a lot of money to make and had trouble selling, partially because most of the German citizens could not afford the high price tag. Meanwhile, motorcycle sales were falling, so by the middle of the 1950s, BMW was in bad shape and believed to be headed toward bankruptcy unless something major came along to save them. Well, the thing that came along to save them was a sequence of successful cars, starting with maybe one of the most unlikely successes, the Isetta. This was a tiny a three-wheel car originally produced by an Italian company that was more known for making refrigerators, and oddly enough, the Isetta opened up from the front with a single door, much like a refrigerator. BMW saw this car at an auto show, bought the rights to make it, added a fourth wheel, a modified motorcycle engine, and released it to the public within the year. We have to recognize that it is funny to think about how such a peculiar, inexpensive car was once so impactful to a company like BMW. Over the next 8 years, they sold over 160,000 of them, so not exactly a solution to their problems, but it bought them enough time to figure out a solution. In 1959, the BMW 700 was introduced as an inexpensive option that addressed a lot of the issues that people had with the Isetta, like how it was not nearly as small and the doors were actually on the sides of the car. Then, potentially even more impactful, in 1962, BMW introduced the 1500 model. This one was much more luxurious compared to the other two, and according to the company, this was the model that re-established BMW as a successful modern car maker. The demand for it was greater than the supply, and all three of these cars have been credited with rescuing BMW in their own way. I imagine without any one of them, the company would look much different today. They allowed BMW to survive through the tough time and set the company on a stable path without anything that I would consider to be a major stumble until the 1990s. Bringing me to the next fall on my list, the Rover acquisition. See, Rover was a British automaker that was actually owned by the British government before it was sold to this company British Aerospace in 1988. By 1994, when BMW bought it from them for over $1.2 billion, it seemed like it could be the perfect fit. BMW was mostly specialized in luxury cars, while Rover produced less luxurious cars and SUVs with the brand Land Rover. I mean, SUVs were really emerging at the time. The overall idea, the reasoning behind this deal was that BMW wanted to become bigger, and this was believed to be a quick and effective way to enter these new markets without diluting the prestigious BMW brand name. Well, the reality of it was not quite as smooth. In fact, this is generally believed to be one of the worst acquisitions within the auto industry. Part of the issue was that they potentially rushed into the deal. They wanted to remain competitive and avoid being acquired themselves by a competing company, so their desire to grow may have caused them to be more likely to accept or even overlook existing issues with Rover along the lines of outdated equipment and struggling reputations. Conversion rates involving the strength of the British pound may have played a factor, but probably the biggest single issue was failing to integrate the companies properly. BMW mostly let the management over at Rover do their own thing, and they failed to create a unified business plan where the two brands could potentially benefit from each other. By the end of the decade, Rover was losing over $1 billion each year, or to say that in a different way, BMW was losing around $3 million each day simply by owning this company. It got so bad that the German papers gave it the nickname the English Patient. Meanwhile, it was taking focus away from their existing BMW brand that was starting to lose market share in key markets around the world. It's difficult to express the extent of this because they were being harmed in numerous ways that may not be as straightforward. For example, right when the SUV market was exploding, BMW was holding off on releasing their first offering because they were afraid it would take focus away from the Land Rovers. So there were multiple layers to this, and almost none of it was good. The CEO of BMW that helped make that deal happen in the first place resigned from the company, and finally, in the year 2000, BMW essentially gave up on their plan. The Land Rover SUV brand was sold to Ford for $2.9 billion, and the rest of the company was sold to a group of British companies for the price of $15, along with the promise of a $700 million loan. To summarize here, BMW's involvement with Rover was poorly handled and may not have been the best idea in the first place. Going back to my list, the final rise of BMW has so many factors to it, but to keep it simple, I'm just going to call it diversifying. Kind of what they were trying to do before, right? But this is when BMW started expanding within different markets in what appears to be a much smarter way. Just going through different parts of it here, in 1999, they finally released the first BMW branded SUV that they technically promoted as a sports activity vehicle, SAV, and it sold very well. In 2001, they successfully relaunched the brand Mini, which had actually been acquired as part of the Rover deal and was just about the only part that they held on to from that. In 2003, they took control of the Rolls-Royce brand. That was big, and it fits in perfectly with their luxury image. The following year, in 2004, they introduced the 1 Series as a cheaper, less luxurious option option, and in 2013, they released the i3 to start their line of electric vehicles that they say will make up 50% of all sales by 2030. I would say all of this proves that BMW has broadened their reach significantly over the past few decades, to a point where their sales have grown to almost 4 times higher compared to back then. All of this, by the way, while maintaining that higher-end reputation of being the ultimate driving machine. I mean, that slogan has lasted so long for a reason. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about BMW? Clearly some touchy, controversial stuff early on, but they seem to have mostly separated themselves from that period to where most people probably are not familiar with those stages in their history. But I have to say, it is still impressive that they were able to exist through all of it. I do not know of many companies that have survived for this long through this many changes and this many obstacles. Also, for anyone who has owned a BMW or has had access to one, what is your review of it? Would you say BMW is overhyped or overpriced, or do you think the quality of the product justifies what you pay for it? Finally, let me know what you think of my list of all these rises and falls, and tell me if you think something should be added or subtracted from it. As always, I want to make it clear that this was meant to be an overview of the company that only highlights some of the more eventful periods throughout its history. There is so much more that could be discussed about BMW, so feel free to bring up anything interesting that I failed to mention, and any other thoughts you have about Bayerisch Motorenwerk BMW, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.